There was a night, many years ago, when I sat alone in a small room lit only by the trembling flame of an oil lamp. On the desk before me lay the private letters of Andrew Carnegie, the notes I had taken from 500 of the most successful men and women of my century, and a blank sheet of paper. A young man had asked me that afternoon why two men born on the same street, raised by similar parents, educated in the same schoolhouse, could walk into the world and watch one become a millionaire while the other died with empty pockets and a bitter heart. I told him I would think about it. What I did not tell him was that I had already been thinking about it for 20 years. That night, as the wind pressed against the windows, I understood something that changed the direction of my entire life. The difference between those two men was not in their muscles, not in their luck, not in their bloodline, not even in their intelligence. The difference lived in a place no eye had ever seen. It lived inside their minds, and more specifically, it lived in what they had allowed themselves to think, to believe, and to repeat in the silent hours of their own solitude. I want you to understand something before I go any further. When I titled my work with those 4 words, Think and Grow Rich, I did not choose them because they sounded clever. I chose them because they described a law as precise as gravity, as unvarying as the rising of the sun, and as indifferent to human opinion as the tides of the sea. Carnegie knew it. Edison knew it. Ford knew it. Rockefeller knew it. Each of them, in private conversation, admitted to me that the visible empire they had built was merely the outward shadow of an invisible empire they had first constructed in the silent laboratory of their own thought. But the most surprising part of my discovery came only later, and it was this. The law did not care whether a man was rich in his outer circumstances at the moment he began. It only cared what he thought about, what he believed about, and what he expected. The man who thought in the currency of abundance eventually drew abundance to himself, no matter how empty his pockets were at the start. The man who thought in the currency of lack eventually drew lack to himself, no matter how full his pockets were at the start. I watched this pattern repeat itself so many times in so many lives across so many decades that I could no longer call it a coincidence. I had to call it what it was, a law. Now, when I first began to speak of a definite major purpose, people would nod politely and then return to their drifting. They treated the phrase as a suggestion, a piece of advice one might or might not follow. They did not understand that a definite major purpose was not a suggestion. It was the first cornerstone, without which nothing else could be built. A man without a definite purpose is like a ship without a rudder, turned by every wind, pushed by every current, arriving nowhere in particular and blaming the sea for his failure to arrive. He was intelligent, often more intelligent than those who surpassed him. He was hard-working, often more hard-working than those who outpaced him, but he could not tell you in a single clear sentence what he intended to accomplish with his life. And so his life accomplished nothing with him. When Andrew Carnegie first sat across from me, he looked at me for a long time before speaking. He was measuring me, deciding whether I had the stamina to carry the thing he wanted to pass on. Then he asked if I would spend 20 years of my life without salary, studying the laws behind the accumulation of wealth. I said yes before he had finished the question. He later told me my answer came within 29 seconds, and that if I had taken longer than 60, he would have ended the interview. I had just made the most consequential decision of my life, simply because I had already, long before he asked, decided who I wanted to become. That is the first secret. A definite major purpose is not something you discover in a moment of calm reflection on a quiet Sunday afternoon. It is something you commit to, often before you are fully ready, because the commitment itself is what begins to shape you into the kind of person who can carry it. I have watched men wait their entire lives for the feeling of readiness that would finally authorize them to begin. That feeling never came. It never comes. The feeling of readiness is not the cause of commitment. It is the consequence of commitment. Faith, I eventually came to understand, was the second cornerstone. But the faith I speak of is not the faith of Sunday sermons, nor the faith of men who hope quietly that things will work out. It is the active, burning, unreasonable conviction that the thing you have decided upon is already on its way to you, even when every outward circumstance argues the opposite. When Edison pursued the electric light through 10,000 failures, he was not practicing patience. He was practicing faith. Each failure was, in his inner world, merely a report that one more wrong path had been eliminated, and therefore the right path was one step closer. The ordinary man would have called this self-deception. Edison called it the natural way a mind works when it has been properly trained. What Hill observed in men like Edison was deeply unsettling to those who preferred easier explanations. It meant genius was not a gift bestowed by nature upon the lucky few. It meant genius was a discipline, available to anyone willing to undertake it, but refused by almost everyone because the discipline required the abandonment of every excuse. And men love their excuses. They love them more than they love the thing they claim to want. I have watched a man describe his dream for an hour, and in the same breath list the 47 reasons he could not pursue it, and then look at me with wet eyes as if to say, "Do you see how tragic my situation is?" I did not see tragedy. I saw a choice. The subconscious mind is the most obedient servant that has ever existed. It does not argue with you. It does not correct you. It does not protect you from the consequences of your own instructions. Whatever image you hold in it, persistently and with feeling, it takes as an order, and it begins quietly, tirelessly, to arrange the outer world in a manner that corresponds to that order. This is why the poor man who constantly rehearses his poverty cannot escape it, even when opportunity sits across from him at the dinner table. He has given his subconscious mind a different instruction, and the subconscious mind is loyal to the instruction, not to the opportunity. Here begins the darkest game of the subconscious mind. The same faculty that can carry a man from poverty to palaces can also carry him from comfort to ruin, and it does so with exactly the same efficiency. It is a neutral instrument, like fire. Fire will cook your meal or burn down your house with equal willingness. The question is never whether the instrument is powerful. The question is always who is holding it and what instruction they have given it, and whether they have given that instruction consciously or by accident. Most men, I discovered, give their instructions by accident. They wake in the morning and rehearse their fears before their feet have touched the floor. They speak their worries aloud over breakfast, repeat their limitations in conversations throughout the day, and go to sleep replaying their defeats. And then, having spent 16 hours programming their subconscious mind with the exact picture of the life they do not want, they wonder why the life they do not want continues to arrive at their door. Autosuggestion, which I placed near the center of my philosophy, was my answer to this tragedy. It is the deliberate, repeated, emotionally charged presentation to the subconscious mind of the picture you do intend to see materialize. It is not a trick. It is the conscious use of a faculty every human being is already using unconsciously. The only question is whether you will use it on purpose in the direction of your chosen life or continue to use it by accident, in the direction of whatever fear happens to be visiting you that morning. I used to tell a young man when he came to me frustrated to write down in a clear sentence the sum of money he intended to acquire, the date by which he intended to acquire it, what he intended to give in return for it, and a definite plan for carrying out his intention. I told him to read this statement aloud twice a day, once upon rising and once before sleeping, and to see and feel and believe himself already in possession of the thing. He would laugh at first and call it childish. I would tell him he was welcome to try a more sophisticated method, and that when it failed, he would return to the childish one. Most of them returned. The detail most people overlook is hidden right here. The statement must be read with feeling, not with the dry voice of a man reciting a grocery list. The subconscious mind does not respond to words. It responds to emotion. Words are merely the vehicles by which emotion is delivered. A statement repeated without feeling is a letter delivered without postage. It never arrives. This is why so many men have tried affirmations and abandoned them, calling them useless. They were not useless. They were simply sent without the stamp of emotional conviction, and so they returned to the sender unopened. Now I must speak of what I came to call the Mastermind principle, because without it, no man of any generation has ever accomplished anything truly great, and with it, even men of ordinary ability have accomplished things that historians later called impossible. A mastermind is not a club. It is not a networking group. It is not a circle of acquaintances. It is the deliberate alliance of two or more minds working in perfect harmony for the attainment of a definite objective. When such an alliance is formed, something occurs that cannot be explained by simple arithmetic. A third mind seems to arise, greater than the sum of the individuals, as though the atmosphere between them became itself a kind of intelligence. Carnegie surrounded himself with such a mind. So did Ford, who drew to himself Edison, Firestone, and Burroughs, and who openly admitted that much of what the world attributed to his genius was in fact the genius of the alliance he had cultivated. Ford could not read a blueprint well. He was not a formal engineer, but he knew how to summon around himself men who could, and how to hold them in such harmony that their combined intelligence operated in service of his definite purpose. That was the real secret of the man who put the world on wheels. What the lives of great achievers have been trying to tell us for centuries is that no one arrives alone. The myth of the self-made man is a flattering story we tell ourselves at dinner parties, but it is not true. Every great achiever has been carried in part by the minds he chose to walk beside. And the reverse is equally true. Show me the 5 people with whom you spend the most hours of your week, and I will show you with reasonable accuracy the trajectory of your next 10 years. This is not sentiment. This is observation. Specialized knowledge, I used to remind my students, is not the same as general knowledge. Schools give general knowledge. The world rewards neither general knowledge nor diplomas. The world rewards specialized knowledge applied through organized plans toward a definite end. A man may hold 3 diplomas and still starve because he has never translated what he knows into something the world is willing to pay for. The question is never how much you know in general. The question is always whether you know deeply and practically the one thing upon which your definite major purpose depends. An imagination, my friends, is the workshop of the soul. Every building in your city once stood first as a picture in somebody's mind. Every fortune ever accumulated was first imagined by the man who accumulated it, long before a single dollar of it arrived. When a man neglects his imagination, he loses the organ by which his future is built, and condemns himself to inherit a future built by the imaginations of other men, most of whom do not have his best interest in mind. Here the real turning point begins, because we must now speak of something almost no philosopher of my time had the courage to address openly. I call it the 6 ghosts of fear. They are the fear of poverty, the fear of criticism, the fear of ill health, the fear of the loss of love, the fear of old age, and the fear of death. These 6 ghosts haunt the majority of human beings from the cradle to the grave. They are not personal. They are inherited, absorbed, and rehearsed, passed down from one generation to the next like a cursed heirloom no one thinks to examine and throw away. Of these 6, the fear of criticism has destroyed more potential fortunes than any of the others combined. The fear of poverty keeps men in chains, yes, but the fear of criticism keeps men from ever stepping toward the door. The man who is afraid of what the neighbors will say will never leave his small life. He will not start the business. He will not write the book. He will not speak the truth he knows he was born to speak. He will die with his song still inside him, and the world will be poorer for it, though the world will never know what it has lost. What Hill said about this subject in his private conversations was harsher than what he permitted himself to print. He said that most men did not fear poverty itself. They feared being seen as the kind of person who had tried to become wealthy and failed. They would rather remain comfortable in mediocrity than risk the humiliation of visible ambition. And so they chose the slow, respectable death over the loud, uncertain life, and they called this choice prudence, though in truth it was the deepest form of cowardice that exists because it was cowardice disguised as wisdom. I want to say something about persistence because it is the one quality I found in every great achiever without a single exception, and the one quality I found absent in almost every failure. Persistence is not the roaring perseverance of a man charging up a hill. Most of the time, it is the quiet, unwitnessed act of getting up one more morning and doing the unremarkable work after the enthusiasm of the beginning has long since evaporated and the applause has never arrived. It is the willingness to continue when continuing feels pointless, because some stubborn voice inside refuses to accept that it is pointless. Lincoln, I often reminded my students, lost election after election, suffered the death of a woman he loved, endured a nervous collapse, and failed in business, and yet he kept returning to the work he believed himself called to. When he finally became president, it was not because his luck had changed, it was because his luck had finally caught up with his persistence. The world seems for a long time to conspire against the persistent man. And then one day, without warning, the world turns, and observers call him gifted or lucky. He is neither. He is simply the man who did not stop. The modern world has developed a peculiar allergy to persistence. It has fallen in love with the quick, the viral, the overnight, and trained an entire generation to abandon their definite major purpose the moment it ceases to feel exciting. The modern man has 1,000 tools my generation did not possess, and yet accomplishes less with his life because he has lost the old, unglamorous virtue of staying with a thing long enough for the thing to ripen. Modern man has lost the compass of his inner purpose, but he has not lost the need for it. He walks through streets full of noise and wonders why his mind is noisy. He fills his hours with small stimulations and wonders why he feels empty. He has never sat alone long enough to hear the voice of his own definite purpose. And so he follows the purposes of other men, sold to him by people who profit from his drifting. This will not be cured by better technology. It will only be cured when each man decides, privately and seriously, to reclaim the government of his own mind. Let me tell you something about what I came to call thought vibration. Thoughts have a quality, a charge, a frequency, and this quality attracts into a man's life circumstances that match its frequency. The man whose dominant thoughts are fear will not need to go searching for things to fear. They will come to him. The man whose dominant thoughts are confident expectation will not need to chase opportunity. It will find his address. I do not ask you to believe this because I say it. I ask you to observe it for 30 days in your own life and then decide. There is a faculty I named the sixth sense, which I placed at the end of my philosophy because no man can reach it until he has first mastered the others. It is the faculty through which hunches arrive, through which the right idea appears at the right moment, through which a man seems to know what to do before he has reasoned his way to it. I do not claim to fully understand it. I only claim to have observed over and over that men who had disciplined their minds long enough began to receive a kind of guidance from within that could not be accounted for by ordinary thinking. They called it intuition, instinct, inspiration, the still small voice. I called it the sixth sense, and I left the theological explanations to those more qualified than myself. What the lives of great achievers have been trying to tell us for centuries is that the inner world is not separate from the outer world. They are two faces of a single coin. A man's outer life is always eventually a faithful report on the condition of his inner life. If you wish to change your outer life, and you have not yet changed your inner life, you are trying to rearrange a shadow by moving your hands against the wall. The shadow will not obey. Only the object that casts the shadow will obey. And that object is your thought, your belief, your dominant mental image of yourself and your future. Now, I must speak of a paradox that took me years to understand, and which I have seen break the progress of even the most earnest students of this philosophy. The paradox is this: a man cannot grow rich while he is still secretly ashamed of the desire to grow rich. The subconscious mind will not produce for you what you have condemned in your own heart. If, in one chamber of your mind, you are affirming your worthiness of abundance, while in another chamber you are quietly believing that wealthy people are corrupt, that money is dirty, that to have is to take from someone else, then your two chambers are at war, and the war will exhaust you, and the exhaustion will look from the outside like bad luck. I had to work with many good-hearted men who could not accept wealth because deep inside they did not believe they deserved it, or did not believe it was spiritually acceptable to pursue it. Wealth, properly earned and properly used, is not a moral problem. It is a moral opportunity. It is stored potential, service rendered in advance, crystallized into a form that can be directed toward any good the holder chooses. The man who condemns wealth in principle has condemned in advance his own ability to create it, and then he calls his inability a virtue, which is one of the oldest self-deceptions in the human catalog. In the darkest corner of your failures waits the light you most fear to face. Every failure, I came to believe, carries within it the exact lesson required for the next stage of one's growth. But the lesson will not be delivered to a man who refuses to examine the failure. The man who blames, explains, and hurries away from his defeat walks past his own education. The man who sits with his defeat, turns it over, asks it honestly what it has come to teach him, walks away with something no university can give. This is why so many of the great achievers I interviewed spoke of their failures with something close to gratitude. They were not pretending. They had genuinely come to see their defeats as the tuition they had paid for the wisdom they now possessed. He who refuses the descent into struggle will never truly rise. There is no path to greatness that does not pass through a valley, and the valley is not an obstacle on the path. The valley is the path. The man who demands a road without a valley is demanding a life without growth, because growth is precisely what occurs in the valley and nowhere else. The mountaintop is where growth is displayed, but it is never where growth occurs. That work is always done lower down in the dark, where no one is watching and no one is applauding, and where only the man's own commitment to his definite major purpose keeps him walking. Let me close by telling you something I have not often put into print. In my later years, I came to believe that the title of my work was not quite complete, though I never had the occasion to amend it. Think and Grow Rich is true, yes. But what I meant by rich was never only the possession of money. I meant the possession of a life lived in alignment with one's highest self, a life in which one's outer conditions have been shaped by one's highest thought, a life in which a man could look back and say, without flinching, that he had not wasted the brief chance he had been given. Money was a part of this, because money is the proof that one has rendered value to one's fellow man. But money alone was never the point. The point was the becoming. The fortune was only the outer evidence of the inner transformation. And so I leave you tonight with a question, not a slogan, not a formula, but a question to carry into the silence of your own solitude when the house is quiet and no one is watching. What is the dominant thought you have been rehearsing day after day in the private chamber of your mind? Because whatever it is, whether you chose it consciously or inherited it by accident, it is already, at this moment, constructing the outer circumstances you will find yourself inhabiting 1 year from now, 5 years from now, 20 years from now. You may continue to rehearse it, or you may begin this very evening to rehearse something else. The choice, as it has always been, is yours alone, and no one will make it for you, and no one can take it from you. When was the last time you truly listened to the voice of your own definite purpose? Not the purposes your family suggested, not the purposes your culture approved, not the purposes your circumstances permitted, the one that has been waiting patiently in the deepest chamber of your mind for you to finally sit still long enough to hear it. It is speaking now. It has always been speaking. The only question is whether tonight, for the first time in a long while, you will grant it the hearing it has always deserved. And if you do, I can tell you from the accumulated evidence of 20 years of study and 500 lives examined that what will happen next will not look like luck to anyone watching from outside. But you will know because you were the one who stopped drifting and started thinking and began at last to grow rich in the only way that ever mattered.